The Seahawks have a wealth of riches at cornerback, including top 5 pick Devon Witherspoon, but that may create a good problem for the Seahawks they're trying to deal with now in training camp. How should they proceed with Witherspoon and company? Rob Rang and I will be breaking it all down on our Wednesday installment of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening in Yakima, Washington, or near my old neck of the woods in Indianapolis, Indiana. We greatly appreciate you making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks enjoying a much-deserved day off after 2 hard-fought, physical, padded practices. They'll be back in action tomorrow, but that doesn't mean we don't have anything to talk about. There's plenty of exciting news coming out of the VMAC and Seahawks training camp, including a cornerback situation that continues to become more intriguing by day. We're going to be dissecting what's gone on at that position so far and what should be next for the Seahawks. How can they maximize that really talented cornerback group? We're going to dish out our revised last 5 in, first 5 out for 53-man roster projections, and we're going to catch up with 5th-round pick Mike Morris, one of the more entertaining rookies that's joining the Seahawks squad this year, for an exclusive interview. This jam-packed episode is brought your way by FanDuel Sportsbook. This episode is brought your way by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Wednesday edition of the Locked On Seahawks podcast. When Seattle made a somewhat surprising selection, at least for some people, a surprising selection, drafting Devon Witherspoon 5th overall, they took what was already a talented young secondary and further bolstered that group. And so far in training camp, that talent and depth has been on display. One of the big storylines for the Seahawks, Tre Brown and Mike Jackson, have been thriving, 2 of the standouts in training camp at the outside cornerback positions. Witherspoon had his best practice so far on Tuesday. He was smacking people, making some nice plays in coverage as well, starting to play as the Seahawks expect, but he's gotten a lot of reps in the slot rather than the outside. Coby Bryant's playing some at safety. Reek Woolen hasn't even gotten on the field yet. He's on the PUP list. When he returns, it's going to further muddy the waters for this really talented position group. And so this really begs the question, Rob, what are the Seahawks trying to accomplish right now at corner, and what needs to happen next to maximize this group? Because it really does feel like there's a lot of moving parts, and not for bad reasons, but you've got so much talent at that position, and only so many of these players can play on the field at once together. I don't think they're going to be busting out an 11 defensive backs package, but maybe Pete Carroll's going to try to find a way to do that with some of the blitzing talent they have in the safety position. Nonetheless, there's limited spots for these guys, and it has created a little bit of a conundrum here at the cornerback spot.
Yeah, it has, just because there's just so much talent that Seattle has the cornerback position. That's why it was a stunning selection, in my opinion, number 5 overall. It's not that I didn't think that Devon Witherspoon was worth it. I had him going in my final mock draft 1 pick later to the Detroit Lions at number 6 overall. So I certainly believe that he was worthy of that spot. But you mentioned the impact that Tariq Woolen had a year ago for the Seahawks. Mike Jackson, the veteran, was absolutely terrific. And then you see the young players and Tre Brown and Coby Bryant, and you think, okay, Seattle's cornerback position is stocked. There's no way that they're going to go in that direction at number 5 overall. And yet they believe that he was the best player available. And I think that belief has been justified, at least with what I saw going to the practice on Tuesday, where Devon Witherspoon was every bit as good as expected, every bit as physical, every bit as feisty. And I think that when you add players like that to your defense, almost by definition, it's going to get better. And I think that this is something that some Seahawks fans out there, when they think of the cornerback position, all they're thinking about is pass defense. And I think that Devon Witherspoon is also going to have a huge impact on Seattle's running game. And that's why I am not overly concerned about the fact that Witherspoon is lining up as often as he is at the nickel cornerback spot. Because again, I think that he's going to be able to provide some run support there. And I also believe that this is not any type of a slight to Mike Jackson or to Riq Woolen or to Tre Brown, all of whom are, starting at this point on the outside. I think that it's just a testament to their talent. And Devon Witherspoon's going to have to work his way up. Pete Carroll and John Schneider, they are not in the habit of just handing over jobs, regardless of how high they might have selected them on draft day.
Yeah, there's this narrative out there, and to an extent, I understand it because for a long time, slot corner was viewed as a secondary position in the secondary. It was a specialist position, only played a handful of snaps per game, but it's 2023. Things have changed tremendously. This is a passing league now, and it's tough for me to say that being a running back guy, but it is a passing league. Teams like to air it out, and if you don't have a really good slot cornerback that not only can play coverage with all that field, you got to cover both sides. You don't have the boundary to protect you. Not just that, if they can't come up and stick people in the run, teams exploit that. They scheme to take advantage of that. And so I do not think that this is one of those situations. There's plenty of fans out there that will disagree with me, and that's fine. They'll say putting a top 5 pick in the slot, that means he's a bust. He's not playing on the outside. He can't make an impact. I vehemently disagree, seeing how the Seahawks are using him, because we saw, Rob, how bad this run defense was last year. I can tell you one thing that Devon Witherspoon already is showing, and if you've watched the film, you understand he's going to do this anyway, but if there's one thing he is going to bring to this defense, it's nastiness. This guy is going to come up. He is going to smack you. He is going to play the run. He had a sack in practice yesterday, blitzing off the edge. He's a really good blitzer. There's not much Devon Witherspoon can't do on a football field. This guy is a dynamic talent. And so if you put him in the slot, this is not 2000. It's not 1990. You're not trying to mask a guy put in the slot. You're trying to accentuate his incredible skill set in that position. And really what this boils down to, Rob, and this is just my opinion, we'll see where you stand on this, but I think Devon Witherspoon, he is going to be playing every snap for the Seattle Seahawks. The big question here now is he going to be playing a lot of those snaps in nickel and dime, playing inside? Or is this going to be a case where the Seahawks feel like they're better with him on the outside than Tre Brown or Mike Jackson? It really boils down to if he's going to be playing in that slot position. I think it's Tre Brown versus Mike Jackson, maybe versus Coby Bryant, who they're moving around right now. That's what this says more to me about than it does Devon Witherspoon. He's going to play. They're going to get him out on the field. It just now is the competition between the rest of those guys to try to earn snaps on the outside.
Yeah, when I look at Riq Woolen and Mike Jackson, those two players in particular, I see guys who are taller, longer, a little bit higher hipped. They don't have the immediate change of direction, the swivel hips that I see with Devon Witherspoon. I think that, again, he's a little bit shorter player, a little bit more compact, the basketball background and his ability to mirror movements. I think that just allows him to be a little bit more that kind of classic cover corner. Whereas I do believe that Riq Woolen and Mike Jackson are better suited outside. And then I look at, the dominant wide receivers that are in the NFC West division. I mean, you have Cooper Kupp, who, of course, is just a year removed from leading the league in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. The majority of his snaps came in at the slot position. I look at the San Francisco 49ers, and Brandon Ayuk is fantastic. But in my opinion, the best wide receiver, most dynamic wide receiver on that team, Deebo Samuel, plays a lot of slaps in the slot position. Same thing with the Arizona Cardinals. Again, you got a speedster, Marquise Brown. But for my money, the most dynamic receiver on that team is Rondale Moore, who plays the slot position. So again, I think that the Seahawks recognize the dynamic talent that they are going to be facing in their own division. They saw Devon Witherspoon as a guy that has that ability. So fans out there who kind of scoff at the idea that a slot is not a starter, welcome to modern day football. It absolutely is. And so again, I mean, whether Devon Witherspoon is starting in the slot or starting on the outside, I 100% agree with you. He is going to be starting. He is going to be playing significant time. And if that the game film that I watched over his career at Illinois and what I saw in person in Seahawk blue and number 21 is any indication, then Seahawks fans are going to be really, really happy with the selection when it's all said and done.
Yeah, this is about maximizing the talent you have. And Devon Witherspoon, with all of the talent that he has in the run and passing game, blitzing, the instincts, you put all those together, he can be a game wrecker from the slot if you're utilizing him right. And if that allows you to get Mike Jackson or Tre Brown in the field, and you feel like that is your best back defense, your best secondary with that mix, then you go for it. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to win football games. You're trying to get the best defense that you can out there. And if Devon Witherspoon playing a lot of snaps inside equates to that, then you do it, especially in today's game with all the slot weapons in this division. As you mentioned, you need a dynamic talent there. So I really like that they're giving him a long look there. And the more you see it on the practice field, it's starting to come together like, oh, I can see why they're doing this. And that makes this really fascinating. But it does create a conundrum with all the other guys because, again, you can only get so many of these players in the field at once. And so they are going to be continuing to have this intense battle for playing time as training camp continues tomorrow at the VMAC. Coming up next, we're going to be dishing out revised last 5 in, first 5 out bubble watch here for 53-man roster for the Seahawks after 6 practices. I think Rob and I have a little bit different opinion on a handful of players. It should make it a really fun segment. We'll get to that here in a moment on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks that is brought your way by FanDuel. Take your first swing with FanDuel, the official sports book of Major League Baseball, and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything. I'm definitely talking baseball here. From the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run of the day. It's all in the app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. You're listening to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined as always by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there who are tuning in, regardless of where you're listening from. We greatly appreciate you making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Coming up tomorrow, the Seahawks will be back on the practice field for their 7th training camp practice, their final audition before their mock scrimmage on Friday. For our everydayers out there, we will be diving into all the key details on offense, defense, and special teams heading into that mock scrimmage and a bit of a preview for that first, I guess you could say, dress audition that is coming up. It's going to be a jam-packed episode, so make sure you are listening in. With us now being 6 practices into training camp, there's only a handful of open camp sessions left for fans. We've already knocked out 4 of them to this point. And so with us being 1 week into camp, they started last Wednesday, Rob, it's time for us to revisit our back part of the roster, the bubble watch, the last 5 players in, the first 5 players out. And I can tell you my list looks somewhat different than what it did 6 practices ago. I know that you can speak the same. And so we're going to start with the players that right now we believe are just on the outside looking in. They're on the wrong side of the bubble, our first 5 out. And I'm going to dish it to you, Rob. Who are some of the players that stand out to you that are so close, but at this point, you don't see them making this football team in late August, early September?
Yeah, there's a number of undrafted free agents from this 2023 draft class that I'm going to list here that I think have a real chance at making this roster. Now, that's, of course, something that the Seahawks have a great deal of history with. We saw last year, Joey Blunt. A year ago, it was Jake Curran. It's these undrafted free agents that not only made the roster, they, in the case of Blunt, it was more in special teams. Curran wound up becoming a starter for the Seahawks as an undrafted rookie. So, again, these are players that I think have a chance to make this roster, but right now I have them on the outside looking in. I'm going to start off with the safety from Penn State, Jonathan Sutherland. Corbin, I thought that he made several splashy plays on Tuesday's practice, and he is just a hard-hitting, very instinctive defensive back. And because I think that, like cornerback, safety is a very, very deep position, then I think it's going to be a really tough spot for one of these undrafted rookies to be able to make the team. The other reason reason is a player that we talked about before, Coby Bryant, who is also playing some safety for the Seahawks. And it's that positional versatility that Bryant is offering that I think could make it that much more difficult for any of the other safeties for Seattle to make this, other than, of course, the presumed starters like Quandre Diggs, Julian Love, Jamal Adams, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to go past Jonathan Sutherland and go to the wide receiver position, which, again, like corner, like safety, I think is really Seattle's strengths, where they just have so many good, talented players. I think that some other NFL teams are going to be keeping an eye on them. And I'm going to go with the two wide receivers who are basically polar opposites. The 6'4", 200-pounder that can run in the 4.3s, and Matt Landers from Arkansas, as well as Cade Johnson, the shifty slot receiver return extraordinaire from South Dakota State. That both of them, I think, again, have the ability to be on Seattle's roster. But right now, I do see them on the outside looking in. I think want to see some splashy performances from both in training camp, perhaps even in Friday's scrimmage, to be able to kind of get that, move the needle a little bit more for them. And then finally, I mentioned the cornerback position, the depth. We talked about that just a moment ago. I really see the two players that I think, again, are legitimate NFL caliber prospects, and that being Lance Boykin, the undrafted free agent out of Coastal Carolina. I just love his length in Seattle's system. It hurt my soul to put him on the outside of this, because I really was impressed with what I saw from him on Tuesday. And then Chris Steele from USC, a huge 5-star recruit from Florida originally, came to USC, left as an underclassman. And Corbin, I see an NFL talent in him. And so, again, these are 5 players that I currently have on the outside looking in, but it would not be surprised at all in 2 weeks if anyone or all of these 5 players wind up really making a push for Seattle's top 53.
Yeah, all 5 of those players, you can make some arguments, at least for them being on the bubble. It's kind of like the NCAA tournament. These are guys that are trying to get on the right side of the bubble. And for me, I've got a few similar players to you on these lists. In this particular one, you and I both agree, Matt Landers. Matt Landers is my last one out in that deep, talented receiving core. He has made a couple really splashy plays here early in training camp, showing off that big playability. He averaged 20 yards per reception last year at Arkansas, almost 1,000 receiving yards too. So he had an impressive season, 4.37 guy at 6'4", but I have him on the outside. I also have John Radigan, and this is not one that I was expecting I was going to be listing here, but I'm reading through the tea leaves right now. This team is really excited about Vi Jones. Devin Bush is going to be there. I'm assuming that the reason he missed yesterday, nothing significant. He was still out there carrying his helmet. So I think that it was probably precautionary. Bobby Wagner, they're thinking there's a good chance Jordan Brooks will be back at some point. I think they are going to go with the athlete here over a guy like John Radigan, who had a great final year at Army. He's a good special teams player, but Vi Jones is also a very good special teams player. So I think athleticism and upside are going to be the differences here. Maybe more concerned about losing him, not being able to get him on the practice squad because of those athletic traits. So I've got Vi Jones making this team over John Radigan. Josh Oniogo has made some nice pass rushes and one-on-ones. I just think Tyreek Smith is going to get that spot over him. And so he's one of the ones that's looking from the outside looking in. And as for my other 2 players that just missed, Tyler Mabry on a lot of teams would make the roster, but Seattle has 3 really solid veteran tight ends. I don't see them keeping 4. And this is going to be a surprise one on here. Robert Cooper wasn't even back on the roster till yesterday. But Rob, I watched this guy in the drills yesterday. You want to talk about a guy that has his own orbit. Robert Cooper is that kind of player. Seattle does not have a nose tackle like that. And you and I thought when he first signed to the team after the draft that this guy had a really good chance to make this football team without Al Woods being here, without a healthy Brian Monet. But he was not recovered fully from his shoulder surgery, was a little bit out of shape. So Seattle cut him, gave him a chance to get back into full shape. And he looked pretty good from what I saw yesterday. So I actually think Seattle's going to give him a very close look because there aren't very many 330-plus pound guys that can move the way he does. And he had some really good production when healthy at Florida State. So I actually have him, even though he was a late addition coming back, I have him as one of my players that's going to be in that first 5 out. Now let's talk about the 5 players that are on the right side of the bubble, the last 5 to make this football team. And you and I both have some intriguing differences on this one as well. I'm looking forward to hearing your argument for the guys that are on the right side. And if today was the final cut down day, would make the Seahawks roster.
Yeah, there's going to be some names that you just mentioned as being some of the guys that don't quite make it, that do make it for me. I'm going to start off there with Radigan. And the reason why I'm putting him here is I 100% agree with you. I think that it's going to be a very difficult battle between he and Vi Jones. The reason why I have both players making Seattle's roster currently is because I just am very skeptical that Jordan Brooks is going to be able to begin this season ready to go. And if you're going to be relying on Devin Bush in his first year in Seattle's program, then I think that you want to have some backup options. And so John Radigan is a very different player than Vi Jones, as you mentioned before. Vi Jones, just with his athletic ability, and we talked about that he has played on the outside. He's a special teams demon. I have not yet seen the instincts, and the communication skills that I want from that kind of classic middle linebacker. And that's exactly what John Radigan is. And so to me, he is one that is going to be very much on the bubble, but I am fascinated to watch those linebackers play throughout this entire process. I'll skip ahead for a moment to Josh Oniogo, just because I do see a dynamic edge rusher. I do see a guy that has some kind of Benson Mayoya, diamond in the rough type to him. And just knowing that the way that pass rushers are so valued in the NFL and frankly in every other professional football league, I just have a hard time believing that any pass rusher that has any kind of juice is going to fall off of this roster. I would not be surprised if both he and Tyreek Smith, as you mentioned before, you thought Seattle might prioritize Tyreek Smith over. I think that there's a possibility that both of those players make Seattle's roster, which would make it for a very bloated roster potentially on the defensive side of the ball. In the 53 that I am currently projecting, I actually have 24 players on offense, 26 players on defense, and that would be a little unique for Seattle. Usually they're a little bit more even than having two more players on one side of the ball. Finally, I would kind of go to some of the other players. Austin Failu, for the same reason that you mentioned before with Robert Cooper. I think that's going to be an interesting battle between the two. But again, Brian Monet possibly most likely beginning the season on the PUP list. I think it's going to open up a spot for one of those big space eaters. So I'm going to go with the veteran here, Failu, over Robert Cooper. But again, I think it's going to be a very interesting battle. I do have a hard time imagining both of those players making it. And Cooper, to your credit, I think actually may have the advantage at this point just because he's the healthier player. Failu was out on Tuesday. I may be curious to see if he gets back onto the field for the Seahawks soon. He's going to need to if he's going to be able to retain this spot. Finally, two of my kind of sleepers here. Jarek Reed, we've talked about before, obviously, as a draft pick for the Seahawks, and that's, angry little elf, as John Schneider so famously kind of characterized him. I do think that he's got a chance to make this roster. But as I said before, I really think that safety is a loaded position. And while I am intrigued by what I've seen from Reed, at the same time, there were some coverage mistakes, at least in my opinion, from my perspective in Tuesday's practice that I was a little concerned about. And again, Seattle's depth at safety, I think, is going to make that a difficult one. So he's somebody I want to watch, but I'm a little nervous, but I don't think that he is the lock to make this roster that I thought that he was kind of portrayed as. And I certainly thought that he might be based on what I saw at the rookie minicamp. And then finally, Jalen McKenzie. Of all of the offensive lineman, Corbin, that I watched, he was the one that kind of surprised me the most. I was impressed by his athletic ability. I was impressed by his positional versatility and his physicality. Seattle's got some big offensive linemen out there that don't always play big. I think that I see the guys that have such size that they're able to kind of wall people off, but not physically impose their will and create movement. I thought McKenzie did a pretty nice job of staying balanced in pass protection and yet also moving the line of scrimmage a little bit. And because of that, he's my guy right now that I'm kind of calling my shot a little bit in terms of a guy that I think that people may be sleeping on, that I do believe is very much on the roster bubble and is getting a lot of attention from Seattle scouts.
That's really a good segue to my list because I think Jay Curhan is very much on the bubble. And I know that he was the guy that ended up playing guard with Phil Haynes when Damian Lewis was sick earlier this week. He can play the tackle spot, both guard spots. So that position versatility is going to help him. At the same time, McKenzie has looked pretty solid. They got a couple other linemen there. I think Greg Island has taken a big leap so far this year. And so when you look at the players they have there, And with Evan Brown's ability to play guard, that's really the wild card here. If Oluwatimi wins that job, then I could see the Seahawks deciding we've got Brown as another guard option. We don't need Jake Curhan here. Let's keep a more athletic guy. So I think Curhan makes this team right now, but I think he is squarely on the bubble. I can say the same for Joey Blount, who's had a really good training camp. It seems like 35 is making plays every day, and yet same reasons that you mentioned with Jarek Reed the second. There's going to be some good safeties that don't make this football team, and I think Jamal Adams is going to be back at some point this month. I'm more confident in him being back than Jordan Brooks. So with that, that's one safety spot that is taken away with number 33 being back. But I think Joey Blount makes this roster because of his special teams talent, and he's just played too well in training camp not to make this football team. So I actually think there's a good chance he and Jarek Reed II can both make this team because of their positional versatility. Reed can play slot, both safety positions, a good special teams player as well. And I think they just believe in the upside, even if there have been some assignment mistakes. As far as the other players just making it, I have Vi Jones on here because I still want to see a bit more from him on the field. But the athleticism, the fact that he was the one that got to go in with Bobby Wagner yesterday, that spoke volumes to me. So I think he gets the nod there, but he's going to have to continue showing stuff. He is not a lock at this point to make this team. He's got to keep playing well. And closing out my list, Tyreek Smith and Cade Johnson are the other two that I have making this football team. For the reasons that you mentioned with Johnson not making it, I've seen enough from him with his route running savvy. I've seen him back returning some kicks. That's still the X factor here. But his chemistry that he talked about on our podcast, the interview we had with him last week, the chemistry that he has with Geno Smith from that year that Geno was still the backup to Russell Wilson and Cade Johnson was on the practice squad. They got so many reps together. I feel like that chemistry and what we saw from him late last year, those are things that are going to be accounted for when Seattle's trying to figure out who that last receiver is going to be. You want somebody that Geno Smith can count on, that he trusts. Cade Johnson checks off that box and still a very young receiver that was very productive at the college level. And he's had a good camp. Has scored 3 touchdowns in training camp. So I think Cade Johnson's the last one that makes this football team at a very deep receiver position. You're listening to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined as always by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. For our everydayers, we're going to have some hard-hitting analysis coming out of tomorrow's 7th training camp practice and a preview of what to watch in Friday's mock scrimmage at Lumen Field. Going to be a loaded episode. Make sure that you are listening in. Among the many newcomers on Seattle's defensive line, maybe the most intriguing, not just for what he does on the field, but what he does off the field. Mike Morris, the 5th-round pick out of Michigan. There were several rookies on draft weekend that made an interesting impression and got fans excited. Kenny McIntosh, the way that he responded after falling to the 7th round. But there's something about the enthusiasm, the passion, and just the glee that Mike Morris plays the game with and how he lives life. He's just a fun interview, and he was able to quickly endear himself to the fan base with not just the way he responded in draft calls, but when they went canoeing. I don't know if there was anybody that was funnier to watch the reactions to things that he was saying. And you see that personality, and then between the lines, it's all business. Totally turns a new leaf. And not that he doesn't smile or laugh on the field, but I mean, this is a guy that gets after it. And he has had plenty of fuel poured on top of that internal flame that is always running hot, falling to the 5th round. He knows what the scouts have said about him, especially playing inside. And he's looking forward to proving his doubters wrong. So with that being said, we're excited for the chance to chat with Mike Morris midway through his first training camp about his goals for 2023, a Big Ten rivalry that apparently still has some bitter feelings in the Big Ten, and much more. Take a listen.
Early impressions, your first training camp here in Seattle, getting to play in front of the 12s, the open camp practices. How's it been for you?
Man, it's been nice. It's been very exciting just to have fans there, little kids screaming Morris. It's a good experience. I really like it.
The little kids here, it's always exciting seeing them on the berm and getting signed autographs, all that fun stuff. Pete Carroll shooting off T-shirt cannons, all kinds of crazy stuff. How different is practice compared to what you experienced at Michigan with Jim Harbaugh? Obviously, you had your OTAs, and things are fairly similar this time of year, but now you've got the pad.
I would say it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier. In terms of physicality, it's probably we move a little faster here, but I'd say practice camp at Michigan is 10 times harder because just the amount of physical pound that we do is different. It's different. We have 10 team periods, so it's 9-on-7, the whole 9. It's a lot. It's a lot.
What's been the biggest adjustment going from college to the NFL?
I'd probably say a lot of technique, pad level, and I'll probably just say they let you be an athlete a lot more here. If you're gonna make the play, make the play. But I love it here, so I feel like I can be a full athlete, and I'm liking it a lot.
I'm from Indiana, northern Indiana, and it's Big Ten country. It's a religion there watching Big Ten games. So I've watched a ton of Michigan film, and a couple years ago you get to play a little bit more inside for your snaps. How would you compare the role the Seahawks have you playing so far here to what you did in the moments you played inside for Michigan?
I'd probably say about the same. I'd probably say I really wasn't inside on first, second down, only in certain packages. But
I'll talk to Molly today.
But yeah, it's very, very, very similar. Very, very similar. So I have to go back, get my mindset right, and go onto the field and kick some butt.
It's all about sub packages. So here you're going to be doing it full time, a little bit of a change up. You being 6'6", obviously the simple answer to this is I just got to get low.
Yeah.
But the leverage battle, what else goes into that in terms of coming out of your stance, the way that you use your hand and stuff? Because that does create a built-in disadvantage unless your technique is right.
Yeah, it's honestly not as hard as you think. If you just come with the ball, strike the man in front of you, double teams will get destroyed, blocks will get destroyed. So it's really mostly about getting off the ball and not getting in their chest before they get into yours. If they get into yours, it's wrap.
So it's mostly about timing more than anything, and that offsets the fact that.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what I thought. You're close to 300 pounds now.
I'm 300.
You're 300. You're right at 300. Okay. So obviously you've had your weight fluctuate a little bit, but is this where they want you to be at, or is there a goal maybe down the line, maybe a little bit bigger than this?
I mean, my coach said, Mike, if you get 300, you get 300. If you don't, you don't. I'm not really concerned about it because I feel like one of the big concerns was am I gonna get big? Because in the combine I was 270, so that was one of the concerns. But I told him, I was like, you talk to a nutritionist, you talk to Coach Herb and Abigail back at Michigan, who are in charge of my weight and me getting stronger and better, eating right. They'll tell you I can gain and lose weight very easily. So I feel like I'm fine. I'm in a good place.
You've shared this with us that this is something you've done before and fluctuate the weight. But when you're asked to gain that muscle back on, what's the go-to food for you that you enjoy to indulge in to get to that point?
I mean, you just gotta eat a lot of protein. I was about to say something crazy, but you gotta eat a lot of protein, a lot of greens, a lot of veggies, carbs. You just gotta main thing is a lot of protein, a lot of intake.
Anything jump out since you've been here? As far, I don't know if you've gotten to go out and experience any of the food here locally in the Pacific Northwest, but is there anything that's jumped out?
No, not really. I've been going to local places. I've gone to Earl's. I've gone to some places in Seattle, but nothing really crazy. Nothing crazy at all.
What's it been like getting to learn from Jared Reed and Draymond Jones, the two most experienced veterans now coming back? Jared Reed coming back, Draymond Jones his first time here in Seattle. What's that experience been like for you so far?
It's really cool. It's very helpful, very encouraging, very helpful, very supportive. Making sure that I not only know my assignment, but I'm also coming off the ball because that was something that was really difficult for me because back at Michigan, I was in a 4-eye, so I was at a balance step, and I'm playing what we call react attack. So I'm reacting off the tackle. Where here is I need to get the ball. So we're playing more kind of attack react. So that was really difficult for the transition for me. But once I got down to it, it was fun. But yeah, they've been nothing but supportive and leading the charge, and I'm very thankful that my rookie year has been spent with them.
Miles Adams was telling me about this. You guys, it seems like you are doing more power stepping than mere stepping, so that matches with what he said. And
yes.
You guys also get the benefit of a pass rushing coach. That's something the Seahawks have not had throughout the Pete Carroll tenure, and then they bring in B.T. Jordan. What has that experience been like in work with him? Because he has a track record coaching not just edge guys. He's coached some of the best interior rushers too. What's that experience been like?
I mean, it's cool. He's at Michigan State, so yeah, Nah, I like BT.
I was gonna ask.
I like BT a lot. That's Big Bro. That's Big Bro. He's definitely been helping me with my pass rush from inside, because on the inside standpoint, everything happens a lot faster. So from just the hands, just being like a technician in there has really been helping me a lot. I have a long way to go, but progress. It's always progress.
As camp progresses and get to the preseason games, what are your ultimate goals here for the next month going into
I feel like a lot of just going from college to now, I feel the scouting reports are going to be probably run to his side when I'm at 3 Tech, because he probably can't handle the double teams. But I want to make it apparent that just like in college, run to my side is going to be problems. That's what I really want to do. That's what I really want to set the tone about.
You run to Mike Morris's side, there's going to be problems. That's got to fire up Seahawks fans, especially after finishing 30th defending the run a year ago. Really fun interview with Mike Morris, and a player that has really stood out, not just because he's 6'6". I mean, he makes the rest of Seattle's defensive linemen look like they're like 5'10", but he has stood out with the way that he carries himself on the practice field, and really looking forward to seeing what he does when full pads are in and they start doing game situations on Friday. As always, you can follow me on Twitter, Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to ensure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to be breaking down the 7th training camp practice, offense, defense, special teams, you name it. Hard-hitting analysis you love and expect from the Locked On Seahawks podcast. And we'll also be previewing Friday's scrimmage coming up at Lumen Field. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for listening in, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Go Hawks.